Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. I'm Chuck Mason, a past president of the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society, and with me today is Janelle Blue. Janelle is the current secretary and soon will be the president, and our guest today is Patricia Walls Stamm. Pat is the education manager of the National Genealogical Society. Welcome, Pat.
Hi.
Today we're going to talk about something that doesn't get used as often as the population schedules for the census. So these are the non-population schedules for the federal census. And why are they called non-population schedules, since there are names on them?
There are names on them, and it is really a misconception, because what ends up happening is, depending upon the schedule, whether it be agriculture or manufacturing or whatever, it is a case of the names are on there, but it is only pertaining to that particular class of people. So on the agricultural census, the people in the city who do not have farms, did not meet the minimum, were not on that schedule. So that's why they call them the non-population schedules.
And where were these or when were these taken in the census year?
It was taken at the same time as the population schedules. So the census taker would have a folder as such with the various schedules in that, along with the population schedule. So he would ask the population questions and then go into the next category if it would apply.
And just like with the population schedules, I've seen that there are different questions on there. Why is it that they, with the population schedule, I would love to have the questions that were asked on 1900 and 1910. How many children had the woman given birth to and how many were still living? Would love to have that on all of them. So why did they change these things on us?
Well, again, thanks to our Congress, they're the ones that determine the questions. Okay, so the various agencies would want information about certain things, such as what the products were or how the country was developing. And they would give these list of questions to the Congress, and they would determine yes or no, and that would be included on there. With the agricultural census, with the manufacturing census, they had certain step limits. So earlier on, they had less product that they had to do. And later, then the later census, 1880, had a greater, they had to have a greater GPA.
And where can we find these schedules? Are they just
in
one location?
They are hard. That's part of the problems of why they're not being used. Because even though there are some of these that have been digitized lately, there are some of these that never have seen outside of the various libraries that took them. The National Archives has them in all of the branches, but you have to know what you're looking for and where it is.
When you say what you're looking for and where it is,
well, like the agricultural census has not been digitized at all, so it's only available in microfilm.
Okay.
Okay. The mortality schedule, which is another one we'll be talking about in just a minute, has been digitized and for the most part is on Family Search as well as on Ancestry.
Okay. So let's talk about the agricultural schedule.
That's one of my favorites. That's one of my favorites, mainly because we have had farmers on it. I have a picture on the screen, and this is what the 1870 agricultural census looks like. As you can see, on the far left is the names, and then it has a breakdown of all of the information. On the next screen, I have our relative who was Nathan Shaler, and he is right next, and she's going to bring him up. And Nathan has a great bit of information. He has 100 acres, he has 4 horses, and 6 milk cows. He has 30 swine and 30 cattle. Now, Nathan was an interesting individual, okay, because he was a Methodist minister. And besides his sons, he also had daughters. And we're going to see how this plays out. Now, what I ended up doing is after I found him in the agricultural census, I found a plat map for Nathan, okay? And as you can see on this screen, we have the father, Nathan, along with all of his sons and his sons-in-laws on the screen. So you can actually plot out your family history right there on a plat map. Based on the agricultural census.
And are these plot maps part of the schedules?
No,
or?
this is something that's going to be in the archives for your particular county or your particular state.
Okay. With the agricultural schedule, what was the requirement to actually get on the schedule, since you said not everybody would
You
get?
had to have a minimum GPA, and it went up on each one of the census years. But you did not have to own land. That's a very important category difference, because in Delaware, I have a John Walls. He rented his land. And he is on the agricultural census for 2 years running.
That can be important, particularly when you have people who were just renters, that you can't find them, you can't find deeds for them, things like that. That's something I didn't know about the schedules.
And remember, okay, it listed the products. So a lot of the times as you're going in through the agricultural census and going down through the list, you very well may see that people are growing hay in one area on that schedule, and the next one is growing corn. There was a lot of bartering going on. I am not growing this, you are. Let me trade you this for your cows or whatever.
My ancestor was living in an area that was predominantly rice growing. And had I just taken that information, I probably would have said he was a rice farmer. But indeed, this said he was growing potatoes. And so that helped to give some additional information to who he was and what he was doing.
Yeah, I have found with using the schedule information and other information that I, can figure out, okay, well, they're growing this and this and this to support the family, but there are things that you would think they would be growing and they're not. But then you look at the neighbors and, well, he's growing a lot of that, so there probably is the bartering back and forth. Another schedule is the manufacturing schedule.
The manufacturing census schedule is also interesting because it applied in the cities as well as in the county area. So a lot of the times you'll see farmers having dual trades, and you would have a listing of what the main product was and what the resources that went into that main product. So a lot of the times, if you're in the city and somebody was a leather person, okay, a tanner, he may have cow leather or cows, but then he also had other resources that would go into other trades, byproducts, and they would set up a second trade for him. Again, it depended upon the amount of GPA that they were growing. It would tell how many people they had working for them, which gave a lot of information to see how the business was developing.
Now, did it tell you the individuals that were working for the person or just a number?
Just a number. But it was broken down into males and females, which back then was very, very unusual.
Yes.
Yeah. I used manufacturing schedule one time. It was a family, not my ancestors, but a family that I have done a number of projects on, and he happened to be a carpenter, and there were 7 or 8 carpenters in the particular town, which I was surprised there were that many for the size of the town and everything. But I used the information to compare and, found the average and found that he was basically the average carpenter. He, the amount of money he was making, the amount of different things he was using was about average for the group. There were people that used more, made more, and people that used less, materials and made less.
But remember, at that time frame, a lot of the times the carpenters who were using the resources of the trees to make wood products, one of their wood products would be coffins. And a lot of the times the furniture maker was often the mortician for that particular area.
Yes,
my goodness.
That was one of the things that this particular guy did furnish, and I used that information in conjunction with the funeral directors in the town. There were, I think, 3 of the carpenters that were actually making coffins for the town. So, and the mortality schedules is another one that I have one person that I have found on the schedule.
Well, there's a misnomer about the mortality schedule, because the mortality schedule, a lot of people think that the mortality schedule is just for people that died within that 10-year period of census. That's not the case. It's only 12 months. And again, sorry to say, there were people that were missed on the mortality schedule because as you would go, as the census taker would go and ask the questions, did you have anybody that died within the last year? Mm-hmm. Sometimes the memory, it plays a little bit of tricks on us and you think, no, it was longer than just a year ago. Mm-hmm. So, but they have some really great information on it. I have a picture of the mortality schedule for one of us so we can see this. And this gentleman is here, and go on to the next part of that slide. And it tells us that he was a 21-year-old male who was unmarried and born in Canada. But while both parents were foreign born, he died in October, and he was a river engineer. He was burned on a steamboat. Mm. Now, because of that piece of information, that can link us into other things, such as, first off, where he was born,
right,
but also newspaper clippings about the events that surrounded his death, such as an accident or whatever.
Yeah.
Also, a lot of the areas had coroner's records back in those times. So there would be coroner's records that would be dated for those too.
Well, and one of the things that we lack in many of the states is death certificates at the time that these were being taken. So that's why it's really important for people. I have the 2 extremes in things. In New Jersey, where my father's family is from, we have them vital records, including death certificates, starting in 1848. In Pennsylvania, it is not until 1906 or 8, where they keep them continually. I'm fortunate in most of the family was in Philadelphia where they did keep them, but I do have some out in the county. So these are really for people who are looking for their ancestors' death records, a really important resource. We also want to talk about the Union Veterans and Widows schedules.
Yes, and here's a schedule of what one looks like. It was only taken in 1890, and it was supposed to be for Civil War veterans only. I have a screen that looks like this. It's a 2-part schedule. The top part gave the name of the individual along with how long they served in the Civil War and things of this nature. The bottom part of the schedule followed along with what kind of ailments they may have had. So if there's ailments there, that kind of suggests to you possibly a pension file.
Yeah, which would be great.
You know?
And now this would just be for Union, though, not Confederate.
Well, that's the funny part about it. You know how census takers were? Sometimes they included information that they weren't supposed to.
Yes.
And that's what ended up happening here. So a lot of the times, especially in states such as Missouri that was on both sides of the conflict, you would have veterans of the Union side as well as the Confederates. But the interesting thing about this is when they took the counts, they took a line the final enumerator would take a line and put it right through that particular individual, so he wasn't counted.
Ah, so it was an oops, huh?
Yes, an oops. We're not going to count him.
I used these. I have a second great grandmother who was married to her first husband and killed in the war. And then after the war, she married my second great grandfather. And also they have a cousin who is all on one page, but I went through the entire city of Vineland and also Landis Township, which surrounded Vineland, and I have found 3 Confederates listed up in New Jersey, and 2 of them, it's the line and it says Confederate at both ends, and one of them, it's the line with CONF. And as I have talked to people, I hadn't thought about Missouri, but as I've talked to people, almost everybody finds at least one in the area where they're doing their research. And of course, you mentioned whether they had been injured or anything. That to me is ringing the bell to go look for a pension file, because oftentimes these men were qualified for pension files because of those injuries in the war.
But this gave the listing of the unit or the company that they were with. So you can also do a query on the company to get some military history about what they ended up doing.
And we also know how valuable pension files can be. Yes. If you find the right, if you find your name, you might even find the neighbors' letters and so forth. So it's
well, and of course, with pension files, as I tell students when I'm teaching class, you don't want them to get the pension the first time.
Right.
You want them, or you want, as I did for one friend, his great grandfather got the pension based on his service and an injury. And then he waited 6 months. He got it in like 1874, 76. Then he waited 6 months to 2 years, and he applied again. And it took the government 6 months to 2 years to turn him down. And he did that from the time he got the pension till he died in 1918. I had a pension file like that, and I'm sitting there thinking, why can't I have one of those? Mine are the standard 10, 12, 14 pages.
Now, before we leave this topic, okay, and go on to something else, there is one big caveat on this. The beginning states from A to Kansas, to A to Kentucky, halfway through Kentucky, have disappeared. They're not available. However, a lot of the times when people got out of the Civil War, what they ended up doing is they moved out of their particular area. So if your relative started in Kentucky, but then moved on to Missouri or to Texas or somewhere else, he may appear on their 1890 census rolls for this particular schedule.
And one of the points, too, that I just thought of, if you're dealing with pensions, if they fought on the side of the Union, it would be the federal government, so the National Archives would have the pension files. However, if they were Confederate veterans, it was the state where they were living in when they filed. So not necessarily the state that they served in a unit from. So, for example, you could have an ancestor here in Virginia who fought with a unit from Virginia, but they moved on to Georgia or Alabama or some other state. That's where their pension would actually come from. And people often confuse that issue.
And the thing is, too, that you're not going to just see men on this schedule.
No.
Okay? If perchance the gentleman had died, but his widow is there, she's going to appear and answer the question. Yes, he served in the Civil War, and this was his unit.
Yes,
and that was the case of my second great grandmother, because she was the wife of and the widow of 2 different veterans. So she appears, and so does her husband, her second husband.
Oh, okay.
So.
And then there's going to be a lot of letters from other people that he served with or neighbors who said, yes, he was there. And so you can really get the neighborhood that way, too.
The pension files just have a wealth of information with the documentation that they had to go in and prove.
And they have not been digitized at the National Archives. So with that one, if you do find somebody that has a pension file, you should contact a local researcher here in the Virginia area if you can't get to it. But one of the things you can do is check with the Association of Professional Genealogists or the Board for Certification of Genealogists. And they have researchers who will go down and get the pension file for you.
Yes.
Although I love the archives, please understand, their fees for copying some of these pension files are a little bit high.
Hi. Well, and the other experience I had with a couple of people I did these for, they had ordered them from the archives and they didn't come, so they had me go do it, and they eventually got the file. And although they're supposed to copy everything, they didn't. I had done things that they hadn't actually done. And in one case, it was a critical piece of evidence that I had that was not in what was copied. So there's also one defective, dependent, and delinquent schedules. What in the world?
That is the most unusual census schedule. It was only taken 1 year. It was 1880. And in it, it had a census schedule for idiots, for orphans, for people in prison, for blind people. There were 7 different schedules.
And that was their term.
And it was their terms at that particular moment in time. But if you had a relative that was in an orphanage, okay, they did a whole collection of orphanages, okay? And you saw when the child came into the orphanage and things of this nature. And if the child was blind and in an orphanage, they would be in 2 parts of the schedule. They would be on the blind schedule as well as on the orphan schedule. So it was an interesting, much overlooked. And this, again, has not been digitized.
And, you know, one of the things you say that their terms, so was this the facility that they were spending time in that made the determination? Was it the individual family member that could make the determination, or was it the census taker?
Well, it's a combination of both. The census taker would basically go in and talk to people. A lot of the times he would go to the doctors in the area and have a good feel for the people that he would need on these schedules based on talking to the doctor. They didn't have the privacy issues that we do today.
Laws, huh?
Well, and I'm thinking, you know, we all have people that we might say were an idiot or something, and you know, particularly if you tick someone off, you could end up on this schedule. And are these available for every place, or
they are available for every state in the union? However, they are only available on microfilm.
Okay.
So you will find them at the National Archives, and at this point, because you still have the availability of using the microfilm in Salt Lake, it's available in Salt Lake.
You
Are
may
they indexed? I'm sorry.
No,
Are they
that's
indexed?
No,
Okay.
Yeah. So you would
no, but it is broken down into your state, then your county, and then your township. It follows very similar to what an 1880 census schedule is. Okay. So if you find your relative in Cass County in Peculiar, which is the name of a township, you can go to the schedule, go into Cass County, and then down to Peculiar, and you will find all of those records there.
And these two are not going to be as big as the population schedule, so they would be much easier to search line by line.
But just as a researcher, you know, if you cannot find that person and you know that they should have been living in that area, that's a good schedule to look at, because they may have been in an orphanage.
Yes, yes.
And that would take you into orphanage records if these are released. Some of them, if the orphanage is closed down, you may have to go into a historic perspective for the area to find out who took over that particular orphanage.
And social statistics schedules.
That's an interesting one. Again, that is telling you about the area, and it tells you the number of there's no names on this schedule. It's just talking about the area. So you know how many churches are there for the Catholic religion, the Protestant religion, the Jewish synagogues. You have a information about how many newspapers are being published in that area.
It's good to know.
You have what the general funds coming into the area, if they're farmers or whatever. So gross national product. So it's giving you a good perspective on that. It's only one particular sheet, and if there's any kind of statutes that would apply to this, they are usually written on the back.
Is that for all the states?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it's broken down by county again.
Okay. Okay.
So that could be very helpful if you have a family of a particular religion to know that, you know, today there might only be one church in the area to go and look for.
Right. I was just thinking the same thing. That way you'd know for sure that you had checked everything.
Well, and if that's the case, don't overlook, and this isn't the census schedule, but don't overlook the county histories.
Yes.
Because a lot of the time, if you do the earlier county histories, they will have that kind of information there.
So this has been very interesting. These are certainly resources that is not going to necessarily be useful to everyone for all of their family, but it certainly is and encourages me personally to start looking at a little bit more of these, because there are ones I've used, but there are others that I have neglected to use. So, Pat, thank you again for coming in and spending time with us when you come in from St. Louis. I always look forward to you coming and visiting us.
I always look forward to this area.
Thanks, Pat.
And then
that worked out well.
Yeah,
that was fun.
And